the things when I was thinking about today that I thought was really, that's very relevant, that I wanted to talk about with the four of you, and of course with everybody else that's here, is that in the context of the culture that we're endeavoring to give rise to, the motivation, the actual motivation to get together in kind of a marriage contract, which is more or less what this is all about, is not really for the usual reasons that most people do this. So, just to speak very generally, so if this was a modern context, you'd probably get together so you could have a family and make babies. In a postmodern context, you'd want to be able to get together so you could have sex in a way that was culturally sanctioned. But the motivation would really be is really very much for you, for the individual. So in a context in which we're trying to give rise to new cultural potentials and to new cultural values, the highest motivation to do this is really not so you can get something out of this for yourself, but so that you can actually make something possible for other people. And the reason I'm saying that is because we are actually trying to give rise to new values that don't really exist yet in the culture at large, and they're barely emergent yet. And so it's basically through our committed relationships with each other that our shared values become tangible or obvious to the world around us, right? It's when we share higher values, when we articulate what those values are, and then when we put them in the context of our committed relationships with each other, not just sexual relationships, but all our relationships with each other, then what those values are become objectified, they become tangible, they become easy for other people to see and relate to, right? So if we choose to come together in a committed sexual relationship in this particular context, it's very important that we succeed. So it's important that we succeed not for our own sake, not merely just for our own personal satisfaction and confidence, but I think it's even more important, much more important, infinitely more important, that we succeed for everybody else's sake, which is a very different kind of motivation to come together with another person. It's a very high motivation, especially when you relate these very high motivations in relationship to what we could call lower impulses, or not lower, maybe it gives it the wrong context. But we can say that if we want. But to want to come together in this context with the clear recognition that it's important that you guys succeed, not simply for your own sake, for your sense of your own self-confidence or your own pleasure or contentment, but so that other people that you don't even know, would have confidence in the goodness of life because of the fact that you're able to express and project a kind of happiness and confidence in the bond that you have together. That in a shared cultural context where these internal cultural structures are crumbling and are not strong, and most people don't have much confidence in anything very deep anymore. People look to this particular area of life to see how people are doing. And so we know that this is an area, especially in relationship to commitment, that people have a lot of difficulty with. Now, if you're only interested in a sexual relationship for yourself, then it's very hard to make this kind of thing last very long, and that's why so many people have such a hard time of it. Often through making babies, people through simply making babies together, people create a deeper source of commitment. So and by doing that, they create a deeper resolve, a moral resolve to make things work, because now they're responsible not just for the initial commitment they made to themselves, but they're responsible for other lives, for the lives of their children. So that's one way that people can create a deeper sense of commitment and moral obligation, and maybe even spiritual obligation. But if that's not going to be if that's not the principal motive to come together to make babies, then there has to be then you have to look at this in a very different way. So if we're coming together in this context to prove that something is possible, that the values that we're sharing in the context of this particular teaching, that we want to be able to demonstrate their validity to a doubting world, then you begin to see that your victory, the victory of your own union, becomes then a kind of a moral obligation and a spiritual obligation, which completely recontextualizes what it means to be in a sexual relationship, especially at this particular time in history, in our particular culture. So it's a very different way of thinking about what it means to be together. So now you're not really coming together just so you can have a particular experience that would be, culturally sanctioned, or sanctioned in this case by the cultural, that you have chosen, the particular cultural context that you've chosen to identify with, but you're coming together to prove that something's actually possible and to embody a very high ideal. So when you come together with someone else to do that, the way you look at why you're together changes in the most dramatic way from the way most people think of why they're together. Because now you realize that you're together for a higher purpose, to prove something to the world, rather than to get something specific out of this for yourself. And if we want to create a new cultural ideal, and we want to give rise to it, we want to give other people, people that we know and people that we don't know, a reason to have hope in what's possible, then we need to be connected with the moral obligation, the moral imperative that we need to succeed. And that is where spiritual practice and commitment comes into this.